This happened a few years ago. It was the summer after my senior year of high school. I had just finished my exams, and 4 other friends and myself planned a getaway to a camping area not too far away from where we lived. The site was in the middle of the wilderness and consisted of 3 small cabins and an outdoor jacuzzi. There was also a kitchen that was in a separate building as well. We were a group of 5 girls, and this would be the first time that we had gone on vacation on our own. At the time, only one of us had a car, and train tickets were free, and since the camping area wasn't that far, we decided that we would go there by train, but it wouldn't take us directly to the cabins. From the station, we were supposed to ride a bus, which would drop us off about 6 miles away from the camping site. We figured that we could walk that distance, even with our luggage. The train ran late, and we arrived at the station at roughly 6 p.m. We quickly got on the last bus, and by the time it dropped us off, the sun was already beginning to set. The area leading up to the cabins was a very rural zone. There were fields bordered by woods, and a couple of houses along a dirt road. The owner had left the keys to the cabin in a safe box outside, to which he had given us the code for, so there would be no one waiting for us there. After a half hour of walking uphill, carrying our overpacked luggage, we were starting to get tired. We stopped on the side of the road to have a smoke, and that's when a man, who wasn't much older than us, came out of one of the few houses lining the road. He took one look at our luggage and asked, "Are y'all going up to the cabins uphill?" We told him in fact, we were. "I figured. Not the first tourist that come around here. You know, it's quite a ways off. Probably going to take you another 40 minutes to get there. And those cases look pretty heavy. If you wait around for a bit longer, my brother's going to get home with a car any moment now. We could give you a ride." We were immediately weary. We were 5 girls in the middle of nowhere on the side of the road, and these guys were complete strangers. So we politely declined the offer and continued walking. I noticed when looking back how the guy didn't go back inside and was watching us as we walked away. Another 20 minutes later, we heard the sound of an engine behind us. It was a car pulling up next to us. It was the man from earlier and his brother. They suggested for us to hop in. I don't know what we were thinking, but we were tired and the sun had almost completely set, so we agreed. They stopped the car and began packing our luggage into the trunk. The car was a shit box on wheels, rust spots all over, and the backseat doors no longer had interior handles, so the only way to open them was from the outside. Counting everyone, we were 7 people in total and would not have fit in the car, so they proposed to take 3 of us up first, while 2 of our friends waited there. They would drop us off at the cabins and then come back and pick up the other 2. This, combined with the doors that couldn't be opened from the inside, sounded sketchy. I was the oldest in the group, and also considered myself to be the most cautious. So after they dropped the 3 of us off at the cabins, I suggested going with them to grab the other 2. I don't know what I actually could have done if they wanted to kidnap us, but it made me feel better not letting them be alone with my friends. We picked them up, and on the way back, they started hitting on us, asking for our Instagrams, which we stupidly gave them as to not somehow upset them. They asked us what we were planning to do that evening, and invited themselves to party with us. We made something up on the fly, how we were actually part of a bigger group, and how some guy friends of ours were already waiting at the cabins for us. They seemed to take the hint, and after dropping us off and helping us unload our bags, they left. Night fell, and after unpacking and showering, we soon forgot all about the men and started drinking and going into the jacuzzi. After a couple of hours, 2 of our friends were too drunk and tired to stay up, so they retreated back to their cabin. Myself and the other 2 dried off and continued talking at one of the tables outside. From there, we had a clear view of the road. There was only a fence between us and the road, which had an entry door with no lock. The road ended at the camping spot, so it wasn't all that uncommon to see cars pass by, do a U-turn, and go back down the road. But at around 2 a.m., I noticed a car pass by, turn around, leave, then come back again. I couldn't tell the make of the car, but I had a gut feeling. After I noticed it doing another U-turn and coming back for a third time, I hurried the others inside the cabin, where we locked the door and turned off all the lights. I was looking out the window. The car had stopped, and soon after, the fence door outside opened. I could see that it was the two men from earlier. I crouched beneath the window so they couldn't see me. Each cabin had a motion light on the porch, and after what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes, we heard footsteps outside our cabin and the light turning on. We then saw the door handle start to turn. After they noticed the cabin was locked, they began knocking. We were all holding our breaths, hoping that they thought we were sleeping and would just leave and not try to knock down the door or something. The knocking became more aggressive and then just stopped. We heard footsteps again. They walked over to our sleeping friend's cabin and knocked on their door as well. Thankfully, our friends were sleeping too heavy to hear. Otherwise, I might have thought it was one of us playing a prank on them and opened the door. We stayed put for a while longer, but eventually, I gathered the courage to look out the window again. The car had left, but I also noticed something hanging on the fence door. It was one of our suitcases. We had apparently forgotten it in their car when they gave us a ride. But if their only intention was to give it back, why would they do it at 2 o'clock in the morning? And why would they try to open the doors? This story takes place in St. Louis during the summer of 2016. There was this weird clown fiasco going on in America back then. There were random sightings of people dressed as clowns and holding knives, most of them being just for scares. However, when a trend like this happens, it can and will bring out people who are truly disturbed. The details are a bit foggy for me. Not only did this happen some time ago, but I still have trauma from this event. That night, my friend Max and I wanted to go urban exploring at the site of an abandoned cement factory just north of the city. Max was 160 pounds, about 5'10", and I'm a 5'5" female and was around 140 pounds at the time. This particular area in St. Louis is called Cement Land. Think of it as an incomplete adult playground, made from the remains of the factory. The creator died halfway through its construction, leaving the place only half built. It now sits crumbling and abandoned. Cement Land is incredibly easy to access, and once you're inside, it is a huge place full of twists, turns, and multiple structures to explore. Truly a dream come true for a person like me. This night was not my first rodeo. However, this would be the last time I was there. I remember climbing the ladder to one of the tallest buildings on site. Max had gone up first. The ladder led to different levels until you got to the top. We were heading to the 5th level when we saw someone at the end of the hallway. This person was very large, extremely tall, wearing a frowning clown mask, and held what looked like a plank of wood in his hand. Max was the first to see him. He started calling out to him, thinking it was a prank. "Hey buddy, nice costume. You know Halloween isn't for like 3 more months, right?" Max started throwing clumps of dirt in his direction and laughing like a moron. The figure just stood there, as still as a statue. staring at us. He seemed to be glaring at me in particular. Those old paintings of frowning clowns always creeped me out, but seeing one in real life, in an abandoned building, caused a very unsettling feeling to grow in the pit of my stomach. After a few minutes of the figure just staring at us, I could tell that even Max was starting to get concerned. "I don't have a good feeling about this. Let's just get the hell out of here, Max." "Yeah, me either. Let's go." We turned away and made it about halfway back down the hallway when we heard someone say in the deepest voice I've ever heard,
"Where do you think you're going, sweetheart?"
We looked back to see the figure now sprinting directly towards us. We ran as fast as we could to the ladder. Max made it there first, practically jumping down to the next floor. As I began quickly making my way down the ladder, I felt a hand grab the back of my head, then started pulling. I was able to grab the side of the ladder and pull myself out of the clown's grip, but it cost me some hair in the process. I ended up sliding 3 floors down to the 2nd story. If I hadn't been wearing a pair of Easton batting gloves, there wouldn't have been any skin left on my palms. My landing was rough, and I completely blacked out. My memory gets fuzzy from this point. Not only was my head in a world of pain, but I also felt a shooting pain up my thigh. I do remember stumbling out of the building, with Max practically dragging me. I remember seeing blood running down my leg. I also saw the frowning clown one last time, looking through a window on the 5th floor. That's an image burned into my head, forever. The next thing I know, we're in the car, on the way home. I guess when I jumped off the ladder, I ended up landing on a hefty piece of metal, which left a decent-sized wound in my thigh. If it wasn't for the adrenaline, I probably would have had to wait for an ambulance to get me out of there. I ended up at the hospital with 23 stitches and a big bill to go with it. To this day, I have never returned to Cementland. Who knows what that man would have done to me if he had caught me alone, or what he would have done to Max if he had tried to fight him. Every time I see that scar on my leg, I'm reminded of the most terrifying night of my life. This is something that happened to me 14 years ago, but still thinking about it now gives me the chills. I used to live in a small town in Missouri with my mother and my stepfather. Our house was a few miles outside of town, along an old state highway. We were pretty isolated out there, other than the occasional passing car or trucks carrying farm equipment. One day, I came home from a morning shift, and I was pretty tired, so I immediately came through the front door and sprawled out on the couch. My parents were going to go into town to visit a family friend, so I just put on a movie and quickly drifted off to sleep. I must have been out for a couple of hours before I was woken up to the sound of the front door creaking open. I figured my parents had returned from their friend's house, so I just laid there silently, hoping to fall back asleep. After a few minutes of silence, I heard an unfamiliar voice say, "Where is everybody?" My eyes shot open, and I looked up to see someone standing over me. I had never seen this man before. He was tall and muscular, wearing a white t-shirt with cut-off sleeves. He was also covered head to toe in blood. I jumped to my feet instantly. I had never been so scared before in my life. Trying to rationalize, I asked, "Are you looking for my parents?" I know it sounds like a stupid question to ask, but I was still a bit disoriented. He stared at me for a moment before asking, "Who are you?" "Who are you? What the fuck are you doing in my house?" I replied. He stared at me blankly. I thought I was going to be murdered. He kept babbling incoherently and asking where everyone was. I had no idea what he was referring to. After about 5 minutes, I realized that the blood that was all over his clothes and face was his own. I glanced out the living room window, toward the highway. It was then that I began to understand. In the drainage ditch in front of my house was a red pickup truck. I told the man to come with me, and we went outside. Soon after we got near the wrecked truck, another vehicle pulled up. Apparently, the man had been driving drunk and had driven his truck into the ditch. He was intoxicated and had a concussion from the impact. He was so messed up that he thought other people were in the truck with him. Thankfully, he had been alone and stumbled into the nearest house looking for help, which happened to be mine. The driver that pulled up drove the man to the hospital. As far as I know, he was okay. In hindsight, I understand the situation, but in the moment, I saw an unknown man, covered in blood, standing over me. That was absolutely terrifying. It was the winter of 2015. I was a single 31-year-old female with a lifetime of experience doing risky things on my own, without consequence. During this time, I was working at a doctor's office in Branson, Missouri. I had just gotten a new iPhone, and I was excited to try out the time-lapse mode on the camera. On my drive home from work one evening, I decided to stop and capture the sunset over Table Rock Lake. It was a gorgeous evening, and the winter sun would be setting soon. I parked my SUV at a state park parking lot. My vehicle was the only one in sight, but I didn't find that to be alarming. I hopped out and quickly realized how incredibly chilly it was. It was sunny, but it was blistering cold. I opened the back of my vehicle and put on some gloves and a better pair of shoes. I then took off down the trail that led to the edge of the lake. I noticed a showboat making its way across the lake for its sunset voyage, and I thought it would be neat to capture it in the time lapse. The path down to the water was marked with large rocks on each side. I was in a hurry to get down to the shore and into recording position. I lost my footing and fell down hard. My head rested on a pointy-shaped big rock that I think would have knocked me out had I not managed to literally stop the impact at the moment we collided. My knee and one of my hands was in a lot of pain. It suddenly hit me how stupid this was, because nobody knew where I was, and I nearly incapacitated myself on a vacant trail, in freezing temperatures, within minutes away of being dark. As I sat there, recovering from my fall, I decided I was close enough to shore. I would just film right here, where I fell. I was about to find out that falling down was the least of my worries. "You got a light?" I nearly jumped out of my skin. I turned around, and there he was. Standing about 20 feet behind me was a man. Sorry, I don't smoke." "I saw you getting out of your car up there. Couldn't help but notice. You're alone." Where had he been? There wasn't a soul in sight when I parked and headed down the trail. This next part you might find hard to believe, because I myself can't grasp that there are people out there like this. Within less of a minute after his appearance, he asked, "So, do you want to fuck?" I know you've probably heard situations like this 100 times, but think about the circumstances. I had just taken a nasty fall, so running would have been quite painful to do. I likely would have been captured. We were all alone on the trail. Sure, the showboat was still out in the water, but it was several football fields away by that point. No one on board would have seen us, and no one would hear me if I were to scream. I just knew I had to get off this trail before the sun went down. Without missing a beat, I told him that it was too cold to do it outside, and that we should just go to my car. And obviously, I had abandoned capturing the sunset. I don't recall all the things he said during the walk up to the parking lot, but it was about what you would expect. How had I gotten myself into this awful situation? God, this is so stupid. Please, just let me make it out of this, and I swear I'll be smarter in the future. He then placed his hand on the back of my pants for the rest of the walk. Once we got to the parking lot, much to my disappointment, my car was still the only one there. There was another car, but it wasn't parked in a real spot, sort of off to the side, and it hadn't been there earlier. I just knew it was his car. He had been hiding and watching me, and left his car to follow me. You might ask why I didn't call the cops while I was out on the trail. Well, he was watching my every move, and I wanted to make it off the trail unharmed and alive. With the temperatures being below freezing, I figured it was a good excuse to refuse to do what he wanted to do out there on the trail. But making promises to do it elsewhere was the only way I would make it back to my car. Unfortunately, the parking lot was far enough away from the regular highway that passing cars wouldn't see us. The next thing I had to do was make it back to my SUV and escape. He continued going into detail about what he was going to do to me, which is too graphic for me to write about. I was still playing along. I tried to get his name and number out of him, but he refused on both. Why would someone refuse to give their name? We were still by his car. Let's just do this here. No, let's go to my car. There's a lot more room in there. Alright, I need to grab something real quick. He then grabbed something out of his car. I never got a good look at it, but I'm pretty sure it was a handgun. We then walked across the parking lot to my car. I pushed the unlock button, knowing that only pushing it once would only unlock the driver's side door. I had my keys ready. I jumped in, and as he was attempting to open the passenger door, I threw it in reverse and backed up as the tires spun on loose gravel. I then put it into drive and floored it. I was too afraid to look back in the rearview mirror. I immediately called 911 and gave them his description. Oddly enough, he was a handsome guy, stood about 6 feet tall, blonde hair, brown eyes, fair skin, a slightly muscular build, and nice features. Not the kind of creep you were probably imagining. He might have been around 25 or 30 years old. You wouldn't look at him and think anything remarkable or otherwise. I was never in a position to see his license plate, but I told the police about his car. It was probably something that you would see in the early 90s, pale blue in color. It reminded me of my great-grandmother's Oldsmobile. After taking down my information, I never heard from anyone regarding my report again. I may not know who he was or what he has done, but what I do know is that I was in the presence of pure evil that night. One night I was sitting on my living room couch, watching Home Alone on TV. I was, in fact, home by myself at the time. Let's get to the part of the film where the McAllister's home is getting broken into. This is a classic movie, so I'll assume most of you know how far into the film I was. It seemed like that night was full of coincidences, because as I was watching a house getting broken into on television, I heard the window right next to me shatter. I turned to see a figure wearing all black and a ski mask standing outside the now broken window. I don't think he expected anyone to be there. His eyes sort of had that surprised look in them when he noticed me sitting on the couch. Suddenly, I felt someone wrapping their arm around my neck. Within seconds, they had me in a headlock. I couldn't even speak, and I had trouble breathing. It wasn't the intruder at the window because I saw him standing there, watching me being choked by what I assumed to be his accomplice. "Shit, I thought you said no one would be here." "Well, he's gonna be out in a second. It's a good thing you're wearing your mask." I struggled against my attacker. I had to think fast before I lost consciousness. I created separation between his arm and my throat. I then elbowed him in the face, which made him release me. As soon as he let go, I ran, unlocking the front door and booking it to the street with my pajamas and socks on. The whole time, I heard footsteps behind me. But I never turned around. It was a good thing I was on my high school track team growing up, because I managed to outrun him and hid behind a tree for about 20 minutes, and then cautiously made my way back to my house. Once I was confident they were gone, I grabbed my phone and called the police, who arrived about 10 minutes later. They first searched the entire home to see if the thieves were truly gone. Their search turned up nothing. I gave them my statement, and they put up that yellow tape outside the shattered window. The following morning, I called a window repair service, and they fixed my window in less than 3 hours that same day. Over the next few weeks, I plan on installing a door camera and an alarm system. I don't ever waste my money on stupid things, but I think this is a smart investment. Crime in my area has only gone up in recent years, and it seems that the violence that has plagued the inner city for years now is making its way to the suburbs. Looking back now, I find it amusing that a scene in a movie played out in almost the same way in real time. I guess I should pull out all the stops and rig a flamethrower to the door. I've shared a story on here before about the time my friend Chris and I had a close call on an isolated back road on Rube Hill. We nearly drove into a booby trap and were chased away by a truck. But when it comes to the topic of unwelcomed guests, there is another story from my past that I think fits the bill. I was in my sophomore or junior year of high school when this occurred. My brother, John, had recently broken up with his girlfriend, Amanda. They liked each other and tried to make things work, but they just weren't compatible. The best way I can sum it up with any kind of brevity is that John would swear like a sailor, and Amanda would literally slap anyone who swore in front of her. Yeah, even me, like on the second day I met her. She was very religious, and my brother was very indifferent toward religion. So this, among many other things, led to their inevitable breakup. It wasn't a hostile or angry split, but John was the one that broke it off. It was a Saturday morning. I woke up later than usual and went straight to the basement and began playing Halo 3. My mom called me upstairs and informed me that Amanda had gone missing, and her parents were very worried. The police eventually knocked on our door, and my parents and John answered their questions. Stephen, who was a mutual friend of John and I, even hopped in his car and drove around to see if maybe she was out and about, wandering around. With all of this going on, I decided to do my part and took off on foot looking for her, knowing full well I wouldn't stumble upon her strolling down the street. But I wanted to help in any way I could. Maybe I would actually beat the odds and find her. After about 30 minutes, my phone rang. It was my mom, and she asked me to come back to the house. The rest of the story I learned after everything had settled. When John was searching for Amanda, he spotted her car parked up the road from our house. There was no one inside. Turns out, she had snuck out of her house while her parents were still sleeping. Amanda was found shortly after John spotted her car. She was okay, but my mom didn't want to talk about the rest. So I asked Stephen, who had gotten back to my house quicker and already had the entire lowdown from my brother. Amanda had left her parents' house early that morning and drove around for a bit, winding up in our neighborhood. My brother always locks his car doors, but the back hatch on his car wasn't a power lock. It had to be done manually, so he sometimes neglected locking it. Well, I guess Amanda had opened up the hatch. and crawled into the car, retrieving our garage door opener. We do shut our big garage door. However, the door inside the garage that leads into the house is always left unlocked. There was just one key, and 2 high school-aged boys who couldn't be bothered with curfews. So my parents usually left that door unlocked, so we didn't have to call them at 1 in the morning to be let inside. And yes, we have since had keys made so that we could properly lock up. While everyone was looking for her, the officer who spoke with my family asked if she could search the house. The thought of her being inside our house had never occurred to my parents, but the cop's instincts were spot on. She even decided to check John's room first, and it wasn't long before she found Amanda curled up under the covers of John's bed, completely naked. Her clothes, however, were in the basement. She snuck into the house, stripped off all of her clothes, hid them, and then lay naked under the blankets for hours, including the hour I was sitting in my chair, mere feet away from her, playing Halo. At some point, she then snuck upstairs after we were out of the house. I guess Amanda had a mental breakdown and thought she could seduce John, which is what she thought he wanted from her. From what I hear, Amanda is now married and has at least 1 kid that I know of. John smoked one of Steven's cigarettes that day and has been a chronic smoker ever since. He likes to joke that when he gets lung cancer, it'll be her fault. This story is not as traumatic as it surely could have been, but I get this warm feeling in my stomach, like I'm gonna vomit, when I remember that someone was hiding just a few feet away from me, and I had no idea whatsoever. If her intentions had been something more sinister, she could have taken me by surprise. Since this incident, our home security has obviously improved, and I do hope Amanda is doing well. I can't imagine it's easy to have a mental break like that, but having your privacy violated is something that you don't forget. This happened when I was around 12. It was the middle of the night at my house. My dad had been working graveyard shift, and Mom is not in the picture. Since this was the weekend, it was somewhere between midnight and 1 a.m. My dad told me to lock the doors before I headed to bed, which I did. I was turning in for the night, and I went into my room, but I was only out for about an hour. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of knocking at the back door. I sat up in bed, taking a few minutes to process what I heard. I thought it might have been my dad knocking on the door. Maybe he got off early. I was really exhausted, and I knew that he had a house key on him, so I just told myself that he would unlock the door, not really thinking much of why he would be knocking. The knocking came again, but this time at a different location. It sounded like it was coming from the window in the kitchen. I continued to assure myself that it was my dad. I didn't understand why he couldn't just unlock the door himself. He always had a key on him, and if he had forgotten to take it with him, why hadn't he called me? In truth, I was coping. I didn't want to face the very real possibility that an unknown person was outside, trying to see if anyone was home. I was pretty freaked out by now, and there was no way I was answering the door. The knocking began again at another window. I was too scared to get up and check it out. It continued and eventually moved to the front door. It had gotten noticeably louder as well. I was frozen in fear. I couldn't move a muscle. My heart was pounding with every knock I heard, moving from one window to another. I knew that whoever was out there was getting closer and closer to my bedroom window, where my curtains were see-through. I didn't know what to do or say. I just stared out my window, knowing that at any second, the unwelcomed guest would appear. My heart stopped when I saw someone peering through. It was a very tall man wearing a mask. I could hardly make out the details because it was so dark, but I think his mask had some sort of skull design on it. He then tilted his head slightly when he noticed me in bed. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I squeezed my eyes shut and started telling myself, "It's not real. It's not real," over and over again. I eventually opened my eyes and saw that there was no one there. I breathed a sigh of relief until I heard a whisper from outside. "I'm gonna cut you." I basically just laid there for the rest of the night until my dad came home. I have no history of experiencing sleep paralysis, and this felt very real. Whatever the case may be, it was one of the most frightening moments in my life, and I pray that I never have to deal with something like this ever again. It all started in the fall of 2016. I live in a small, quiet neighborhood surrounded by forest. It was unusually hot in our house for an October night. My sister figured it would be a good idea to keep her window open to get some fresh air. She was doing her homework, and I was getting ready for bed, when she suddenly bursts into my room and frantically said, "I think there's someone outside. There's leaves crunching under someone's foot." "Relax. It might be an animal or something." "Didn't sound like an animal. Can you just go and look?" So we walk into her room and stayed there for around 5 minutes until we heard leaves crunching underfoot. We quickly glance out the window, only to hear the steps picking up pace, running further into the trees. This would only be the beginning. During the winters, I often enjoy exploring the woods behind our house, climbing trees, and traveling further back to the fields. I remember this next incident very clearly. It had just snowed the night before, the first snowfall of winter, and I was more than excited to head out there that day. I climbed my usual tree and gave a cursory glance around me, then at the ground, when I noticed something strange. There were footprints leading away from my house. This wouldn't have been so weird if the footprints hadn't ended pointing straight at my house. I tracked them down to a point where there was a rusty wire fence. It was around there they disappeared. In hindsight, these first two incidents were foreshadowing something more ominous. Fast forward to October of 2017. The strange occurrences started up again. On the night in question, it was pitch black out. I was laying in bed when I heard my doorknob turning and my door slowly creaking open. I somehow knew it wasn't my sister or my parents. My heart stopped. Keep in mind that my door is always shut when I go to sleep. Once my door was fully opened, all was quiet. I quickly shot my sister a text. "Did you just come into my room?" "No, I'm in Hilliard right now." My heart began pumping fast. I slowly crept my hand under my pillow and grabbed the nightstick I kept there. I then sent a message to my dad. "Someone is in the house." Shortly after, my dad came into my room, armed with a knife. He turned on the lights, and I jumped out of my bed. But no one was there. We searched the entire house and didn't find anything. We set the alarm and made sure all the doors were locked. Living out here in the woods, we forget to lock up sometimes, and someone had been in our house and had opened my bedroom door. At the time, I didn't connect the dots to what happened the year before. In December of 2017, we had some relatives in town who were staying in our basement for the week. One night, we all headed to bed after arming the security alarm. I stayed up gaming, but I eventually passed out. It was around 2:30 to 3 o'clock in the morning when my uncle suddenly woke up with a feeling that someone was watching him. After his eyes adjusted to the dark, he saw someone. He described it as a scrawny man with flowing hair who appeared to be shivering from the wind outside as he was looking into the basement through a ground window. My uncle yelled, waking up his wife and child. Then they took off upstairs. The following morning, I was informed about what happened. I looked for footprints outside, but saw only the smallest signs of impressions. Whoever had been out here last night had done a pretty good job of covering their tracks. My uncle gave me more details when I spoke to him. He said the figure was leaning to the left while he was looking in. Sure enough, when I examined the area outside the basement window, there appeared to be an imprint of someone's left shoe in the snow that seemed to line up with what my uncle had told me. Now we get to what happened just the other night. I had some trouble going to sleep. There's a string of Christmas lights outside my room, and I figured the lights must have been interfering with me falling asleep. So I went to unplug them and headed back to my room. With the pillow over my head, I began slowly drifting off. Until it happened. There was a very quick strum of the acoustic guitar I keep in my room, followed by the sound of something falling over. The disturbance caused my heart rate to skyrocket. There was someone in my room. I then realized I had left my baton on my desk, so I did the next logical thing, pretended to be asleep. I lay there for what felt like hours, when in reality, it was probably only a few minutes, until I heard a whimper coming from my sister's room. Thinking that my family was going to be silently murdered, I gathered all the courage I had, grabbed my phone, and turned on the flashlight. I then grabbed my nightstick off the desk. I burst into my sister's room, only to see that she was unharmed. "What the fuck are you doing?" I just stood there and awkwardly explained to my sister what was going on. The whimper I heard was likely her forgetting to put in her headphones before watching videos on her laptop, if you know what I mean. I'm now just sitting here, in my computer chair, writing these events down to document my experiences and try to come to some logical conclusion about all this. All I can come up with is that there is some unknown person who is stalking my family and has been for a while and is somehow able to sneak into my room at night. If anything else happens, I'll be sure to post updates. But for now, I'm going to try to get some sleep. My dad and I used to go hunting together when I was a teenager. My father was your quintessential outdoorsman, tall, thick around the midsection, big beard, and a collection of flannels in his closet. My dad has told me all kinds of stories about being out in the wilderness, experiences with bears, mountain lions, moose, elk, badgers, and even wolverines. Stories about almost starving to death while being caught in a blizzard, fighting off a few coyotes while hunting whitetail. The point of all this hype is that my dad was a fearless man in my eyes for so many years, but that would all change. We were camping at the base of a rocky face in one of our favorite hunting areas. The year prior was when I had made my first kill, so I was excited for this hunting trip. We planned on getting up early before the sun was out and head out for the meadow a few miles west. There was a good population of whitetail in that area. That night, My dad was telling me about his time in Alaska, hunting Kodiak bears. Mid-story, we heard a shrill screech coming from down the ridge, north of our location. He stopped and said, "That sounded like an elk." I was freaked out, but his calm demeanor relaxed me. We heard it a few more times. It seemed to be fading further and further into the distance. The sky was clear, and it was cool out that night. When we settled into the tent for some shut-eye, he told me that tomorrow was going to be a great day. My dad loves to hum himself to sleep, so I gradually drifted off to him whistling out some Bob Dylan tune. I remember waking up to him shaking my shoulders. Dylan, we need to go. Come on, get up, son." The tent was dark, and my dad was dressed. I mistook his urgency as being upset. "Sorry, Dad. I must have overslept. Is the sun up?" He shook his head. "No, son. You need to get up now." I then heard it. It was like a banshee's wail coming from the rock face above us. 5-second intervals of on and off absolute screaming. Goosebumps started to protrude on my arms, and the hair on the back of my neck was standing up straight. "Dad, what is that? A fox?" He was quickly stuffing articles of clothing and trinkets into his bag. "No, I don't think so. Get up, we gotta go." I started to pack up with haste. My dad's tone demanded no slacking right now. Everything seemed like a blur in the moment. The screaming above us was definitely distracting, adding to the fact that my eyes were still blurry. I had just woken up. I was groggy and becoming more and more afraid about my dad's tone and body language. "Dad, you have to tell me what's going on." He stopped, throwing his pack to the tent floor, then turned back to me and explained to me in a very hushed tone. "Dylan, I have never heard that sound before in my life. Earlier it was screaming for help. Before that, I started to say odd words with no connection between one another. If it was saying words, then it must be human, I thought. Do you think they need our help?" He looked up in the direction of the rock face. "I'm not even sure if it's a him or her, son. Get your things together and load your rifle." My dad is one of the most stringent gun owners I know. Him asking me to load my rifle in our small tent was not only against his usual gun safety creed, but it heightened my fear level even more. "Do you think we'll even need our guns, Dad? It might just be someone having a bad mushroom trip, you know?" He shot me a look and said, "This isn't a joke. Stop asking so many questions and hurry up. The tent needs to come down." Once we stepped outside, the screams stopped abruptly. I quickly glanced up. There were no lights at the top of the rock face. It was at least 80 feet high, and to the best of my knowledge it was pointed and hard to stand on. We worked fast taking the tent down. In a matter of minutes we were ready to go, with everything on our backs. We started downhill, the sound trailing us. My dad had his pistol holstered to his waist and a rifle in his hand. "I'm going to fire a few shots, and then we'll wait for a response. If there is no response, we'll stay the course." With that, he raised his gun, firing 2 shots spaced apart. We waited there in silence. Nothing. He nodded, and we pressed on. About a half hour later, we exited the forest and began making our way across the meadow. About halfway through, the screams returned. They were now at the edge of the forest, high-pitched screams. My dad raised his hand for me to stop. We sat and listened. I was holding my breath. "Stay close to me." My dad started walking at a pace that was hard for me to maintain. He was taking long strides across the meadow, every few minutes stopping suddenly to listen. The screams were definitely following us. How far away they were, I couldn't tell. If you ask me, a rough estimate was about a quarter mile behind. We got to the tree line on the other side, which then cascaded gradually downhill to a flat walk through the woods, onto a trail, across a small bridge over a stream, then finally down the trail to where our cars were parked. It wasn't exactly a real parking lot, just a place where the local hunters thought it was good to congregate. "Keep up. I'm not slowing down until we get back to the truck." With that statement, my dad basically began jogging. My pack was heavy on my back, the straps digging into my shoulders. If my pack was heavy for me though, then my dad's was probably triple my weight. The screams began getting closer once we started traversing downhill. The light from my lantern kept our path illuminated. I was running on pure adrenaline. My goosebumps hadn't gone away yet. Every time I heard that shrill call, I felt a rush of pure terror going from my spine to my toes, like waves of fear. My hands were sweating as I held the lantern. It felt like I was going to be sick. Once we reached the stream, my dad stopped. He was panting hard, not as hard as me though. I was a stocky kid, but not in the best shape at the time. It had been about 5 minutes of no screams. He looked at me. His eyes were as wide as ever. "Dylan, we need to get to the truck. I need you to go ahead of me now. I don't feel comfortable having you behind me." I couldn't say I disagreed. I felt a lot safer having my dad watching my back, rather than me trying to keep up with his lightning pace. I started going, trying to go as fast as I could, but he stopped me. "No, go at your own pace. We're close." As soon as he was done with this sentence, from the top of the hill, we heard screaming. "Shit! Dylan, move!" The last mile was like an empty memory. I was walking so fast, eyes locked on the ground, trying to keep from falling or tripping. I swear I could feel my dad's breath on the back of my neck. The screaming sounded even worse than before. It was frantic, like whatever was making the sound was desperate to reach us. The closer we got to the truck, the closer it got. I heard the distant sound of an 18-wheeler on the freeway. I knew that we were close. There was a clearing, and I saw the reflection of our taillights in the lantern. My dad then moved past me, practically sprinting to the passenger side door. He opened it before I even got there. I basically dove in. He came around to his side. Before he even slammed his door shut, the truck was moving, and the headlights weren't even on yet. As we made the U-turn out of there, we both looked to the edge of the forest. We never saw what it was, but over the sound of the truck's engine, we could still hear it. As we drove away, my senses came back down to earth, and I realized that I was crying hysterically. I looked at my dad, who was white-knuckling the steering wheel, gazing forward at the road. We stopped at a gas station a few miles down. He leaned over and embraced me. We stayed like that for a long time. He was holding my head with his hands, telling me that it was going to be okay. Yes, I was about 16 crying in my father's arms, but after what we had just gone through, I felt it was warranted. My dad went inside to pay for gas a little while later. The clock read 2:14 a.m. The whole hike back to the truck had probably taken about an hour and a half tops. We basically ran most of the way back. My father and I have never told my mother or sister about what happened. It kind of stayed between the two of us. I tried to talk to him about it a few times, but he just told me what happened, and just left it at that. My dad developed a mild insomnia in the years following that incident, mentioning that he had nightmares. I've had a few of my own, but they passed in time. It's been about 20 years since that night, and that would be the last time that my father and I went on a hunting trip. This happened when I was growing up, around 2004 or 2005. I would have been around 13 years old. It took place in a very isolated area, a good ways outside the town of Uvalde, Texas. The town itself was very small back then, and not much to look at. It's also one of those towns that isn't really on the way to anywhere important. My father knew someone who owned a deer lease that was about 1,000 acres down outside that area, and he was complaining about how a ton of hogs were tearing up the land. Being open season on hogs in the South, my dad thought he would surprise me that summer and take me down for a week to go hunting with him, not only to help him networking for his job, but it also gave us some quality father-son time. I remember the drive down there from Dallas was torture. It was about 7 hours on my dad's hardtop Jeep Wrangler, which was rather uncomfy. I hated it. All I could do was stare out the window and try to beat Super Mario Land 2 on my Game Boy, something I was never able to accomplish in my youth. The drive took up most of the day, so we got there in the early evening. The owner of the property had told my dad that he hasn't had anyone lease it in a year, and the cabin might be a little dusty. I didn't really care. At this point in my life, I had been in Scouts for a couple of years and spent a lot of my free time in the woods or fishing with friends. Needless to say, I was pretty comfortable roughing it. So after unlocking the gate and driving to the cabin, I saw for myself that it was pretty rough. Dust was everywhere. I remember that it looked like some raccoons had gotten into the cabin and took a dump on the floor. After cleaning up, we began setting up the cots and decided to get some shut-eye. Something about that night was strange. I was never able to get comfortable enough to sleep all the way. I couldn't quite put my finger on why, but I definitely had that feeling of being watched. I was finally able to drift off for what I guess was about an hour. When we woke up, it was early, about 7 a.m. We decided to scout around the land for tracks and signs of hogs, and to find a good place to set up a blind. It was the summer, and it was horribly hot in the afternoons, so morning was the best time to be out and about. After about an hour or so, we came to an area of trees, lightly dense, and luckily found some signs of hog activity. Typical torn up ground where they had been rooting, so we followed them into the trees. I was looking for more signs when my dad stopped me with his arm. I remember looking up and seeing someone standing about 50 yards away. My vision of them was partially blocked by some trees. It was a private land, so they definitely weren't supposed to be there. We also had confirmation from the owner that nobody was supposed to be out here, not to mention the gate was locked up when we first arrived. This person was wearing some kind of bright-colored red jacket. We slowly walked toward them. My dad called out something like, "Hey, we're hunters. This is private land." But the person didn't move at all. We were about 30 yards away, and I could see that he was turned away from us, with his hands in his pockets. Weird thing was the guy seemed to be wearing a ski jacket and what looked to be ski pants. Now this is Texas, in the summer. It was about 90 degrees outside then, so the man's attire was unusual. My dad called out again. No reaction. He told me to stay behind him and unholstered his sidearm. That's all we had at the time since we were only scouting the area. The rifles were back at the cabin. We approached the person's right side when we were about 20 yards away, and that's when my dad told me to stay put. I stayed and crouched down, watching him circle around to the front. all the while asking the man if he was okay. Once he was facing him, my dad stood straight up with a confused look on his face. I called out, "What's wrong?" "It's some kind of mannequin." I walked over to it while my dad stood there staring. And as I got closer, one thing that stood out the most was the clothes it was wearing looked brand new. No dust, sap, bird droppings, or signs of being outside for more than a day at most. At that moment, I looked at my dad, and I could see that he was worried. Almost immediately after, I had that feeling again, like we were being watched from somewhere nearby. I knew that my dad felt it too. My dad whispered, "We're leaving right now." He grabbed my hand and scanned the area the whole way back. I was terrified, holding back tears, so to me it felt like an eternity. But in reality it was only about 45 minutes max. After returning, we packed up and drove back home that same day. We didn't talk much on the way back. I remember right after we left, my dad called up his buddy, the owner of the property, and after explaining, he was very confused and said that he would go check it out the next week when he was back in that area. He also said that he had never had an issue with people on his property because of his very high perimeter fence. My dad usually isn't a paranoid person, but with me being young and the possibility of someone out there that we didn't know about, he decided to be cautious and just get out of there. After we got back, we talked. My dad wasn't able to sleep the night before as well. He had that same feeling, but didn't want to wake me up. That very next week, he got a call from his buddy. He had checked the entire property and found no trace of anyone, no mannequin, nothing. This experience still makes my hair stand on end. I have no idea what that was, but the paranoid man inside me thinks it may have been some kind of trap. A bit of backstory. My husband and I do a little hunting. We have been scouting an area and setting up some traps on my brother-in-law's property. Just over 10 acres of forest with a creek. He was having a problem with raccoons getting into his trash cans. During our stay, we will wake up every morning around 5 a.m. and we'll load up and head out to check the traps. For a little over a week, we would hear sticks and leaves crunching just out of sight. The property is insanely overgrown in certain places, and you'd be lucky to see 5 feet in front of you. We would brush it off and just kept checking the traps. After all, we both had guns, and there's wildlife out here that could easily explain the movements we heard. One day, right before dusk, we were relocating some of the traps. I told my husband quietly that I smelled cigarette smoke. It was getting dark, so we headed out pretty quickly. We were both kind of annoyed and a bit concerned. Whoever was out there had been close enough that we could smell them, but didn't see them. The feeling of being watched is always a bit unsettling, especially in a forest. Several days went by without any issues, until one morning I woke up feeling like shit. It was the dead of winter, and I had caught the flu. But when you're running trap lines, you don't get any sick days. So I bundled up and headed out. When it came time to cross the creek, which is always fun at 5 a.m., you had to balance on a fallen tree while carrying a ton of equipment. I stayed behind while my husband crossed over. I walked along the creek where I could, and back onto the trail, where I could give my husband a heads up if we had caught anything on the traps on this side. But in the trees, I could see something hauling ass toward my husband. I chambered around into my .22. For those of you who aren't too familiar with guns, a .22 is basically for rodents. It would take a damn good shot to kill anything larger than a medium-sized dog, and I thought a stray dog was coming after my husband. But I stopped short of yelling once I got a better look. There was a man, less than 10 feet away from my husband, hiding behind a tree while his dog was growling and snapping at my husband. He hadn't seen me. I knelt down and put the safety back on my rifle so I could safely look at him through my scope. He was older, maybe mid-40s, wearing ragged clothing. I kept one eye on him and one on the dog. It was a large lab mix. It was still baring its teeth at my husband, who had his pistol out and was very slowly chambering around in case the dog attacked him. It wasn't until he cocked the hammer into place that the man stepped out from behind the tree. He didn't speak, nor did he call off his dog. He just stood there, staring at my husband. "Can I help you? You're on private property. You need to get your dog before I shoot." "I used to hunt here." "Sir, please get your dog. There was a deer stand here. Are you on the lease?" "This is my brother's property and you're trespassing. Now please put a leash on the dog." "I used to hunt here. You didn't bring your wife with you today?" I saw my husband scan my side of the creek before answering. "No, I didn't. She has the flu." "You should go home to her then. You know I used to hunt here." He then whistles, and the dog walks back to him. They then walk off into the trees, not back toward the neighboring properties, but toward no man's land, where there were no roads or houses for about 30 miles. Before he completely disappears from view, he yells, "Tell your wife I'll quit smoking." When we eventually gathered all the traps, there were cigarette butts next to every single one. My name is Ethan, and I was 15 in the summer of 2021. I was one of the older kids who attended Camp Lennox in Beckett, Massachusetts. My parents sent me there to get away from the noise of Boston for a while and roast marshmallows in the New England wilderness. Minus the lockdowns from the year before, I had been coming here since 2018, and since I was the oldest attendee that summer, I became a de facto trustee. However, that summer, things will play out a little differently. Something that I would like to make clear is that this story is 100% true and can be verified by a simple Google search. Also, please forgive me if I get a bit carried away with trips down memory lane. After what happened, I have never returned to that place. And being 4 years removed, I can look back and say that I really enjoyed being there, and it's unfortunate that things ended the way they did. But like my father always says, life isn't a fairy tale with happy endings. I remember that it was the night we were doing rope burn, a big tradition at Camp Lennox. The ritual was simple. We had to build a fire high enough to burn through a rope strung between two poles. The team with the fastest blaze won bragging rights and a pizza. I was on the blue team, and our counselor, Jake, was hyping us up. "Let's be legendary tonight," he always used to say. I was teamed up with 2 other campers, Sam and Riley. We set off to gather firewood from the edge of the forest behind the camp. Nothing unusual. We had done this 100 times before on nights when we were just building fires for roasting marshmallows. So we trudged through the trees with our flashlights, looking for dry sticks. For those of you who spend a lot of time outdoors and may have experienced a thing or two in the woods, know that the forest has a way of telling you that something is off. A strange stillness came over the forest. It was very noticeable to me. We were maybe 50 yards in, kicking through the underbrush, when Riley stopped in his tracks and looked back at us. "Ugh, do you guys smell that?" he asked. He was ahead of us, so it wasn't long before I caught a whiff. It was the unmistakable stench of decomposition. Jake, holding his nose, said, "Ugh, probably just a dead animal." It was the logical conclusion to come to, so we kept moving. But the knot in my stomach tightened as we moved further in. I just somehow knew that we were going to discover something seriously messed up out here. Soon, my flashlight caught something. There was a figure slumped against a tree, half hidden by ferns from my vantage point. I froze once I realized it was a human. The others didn't seem to notice. "Guys," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. My comrades swung their lights over to where mine was, and that's when we saw the full picture. It was the body of a man, curled up at the base of an oak, his clothes dirty and torn. His skin was grayish, bloated, and melting away. The smell hit us like a tsunami, and Riley gagged, stumbling back. Sam just stared, his flashlight shaking in his hand. Jake cursed under his breath and stepped in front of us, like he could shield us from what we had already seen. "Stay back," Jake said, his voice sharp now. "Don't touch anything." He fumbled for his walkie-talkie and radioed the head counselor. "Come in. This is Jake. We found a body in the woods. Send help, now. You boys head back to camp, and don't say anything about this to the others. We don't want everyone to panic." I led Riley and Sam back to the main camp. We sat at a table in the mess hall, whispering to each other. "Was that real? Was that fucking real?" Sam asked. Riley just stared at his hands, like he had a newfound appreciation for not being a melting corpse. I don't think it truly sank in for me until we got back to camp, that we had discovered a dead body in the forest. My mind kept replaying the way the man's head was tilted, like a zombie taking a nap against a tree. The police eventually came and cordoned off the area. The rope burn was obviously canceled that night, and the staff did their best to keep things normal the following day. We played capture the flag and had s'mores by the lake, but it wasn't the same. Sam had broken the silence, and the rest of the campers were whispering in their bunks at night, making up stories about how there was a serial killer in the forest. I didn't join in because I had my own problems to deal with, like how every time I closed my eyes, I would see that body against the tree. Jake checked on us the following night. His usual goofy demeanor was gone. "You guys okay?" he asked. I nodded, even though I wasn't. I don't think any of us were. We'd seen something that we weren't supposed to. Something that didn't fit in with the usual upbeat environment of Camp Linux. We didn't talk much about it after that, not even with each other. When my parents eventually picked me up, I did my best to assure them that I was fine. But looking back, I think I was just depressed, because I would never view Camp Linux in the same light ever again. This place was once a childhood sanctuary in my mind, and was now tainted by the stench of a rotting corpse. The identity of the man in the woods was never publicly disclosed, but the police believed that it was a 35-year-old man who died by suicide. I was 13 in the summer of 1999, living in Oklahoma City. One night, I was at a sleepover at my friend Lila's house. It was our end of summer sleepover, a tradition we had kept since second grade, except this time we were joined by a girl named Emma. Emma's parents were good friends with Lila's parents, and this was my first time meeting her, but we got along fine. Soon, the time came to tell scary stories in our little makeshift tent we had set up in the living room. We made it a game, passing around a flashlight and placing it under our chins while we told our stories. Lila and I recycled the last year's tales, only tweaking certain details from the year before, which we teased each other about. When Emma's turn came, she sat up and asked if it was okay to turn off the flashlight while telling her story. We agreed.
My aunt came over one day and told the story to my mom in our living room. They didn't know I was playing in the upstairs hallway and could hear every word.
Lila and I were instantly intrigued, huddling closer together.
A long time ago, my aunt was a camp counselor for the Girl Scouts. One morning after an outdoor camping trip, she was walking to the showers when she saw a sleeping bag lying on the trail. It was out of place, and she thought that maybe some of the girls were playing a prank. But when she got closer, she saw a young girl inside the sleeping bag. Her face was pale, her eyes open, staring at nothing. As soon as she saw her, my aunt knew that the girl was dead. That's when she saw 2 more sleeping bags nearby, crumpled up like trash. She ran to the nearest one and unzipped it, only to find another girl, curled up and not moving. The third one was the same. 3 little girls found dead in the forest.
My breath caught. Lila's smirk was gone, her eyes wide. "Were they murdered?" she asked. Emma nodded.
Strangled, bruised up, like they had been beaten. There was a red flashlight on one of the bodies with tape over the lens. Inside their tent was a bloody shoe print and a smeared handprint that was too big to be the girls.
I was legitimately terrified. I pulled my blanket up and squeezed closer to Lila. "Your aunt really saw all that?" I asked, half hoping Emma would laugh and say the whole thing was made up, but she just shrugged.
She told my mom she still dreams about those girls, seeing their dead faces staring up at her. The camp closed after that, and you want to know something else? They never caught the guy. Some say he's still out there, lurking somewhere in those woods.
Lila tried to laugh it off, but I could tell she was freaked out as well. The stories we told were nowhere close to this level of fucked up. We eventually moved on to talking about boys and music. But Emma's story haunted me. It was so graphic, so detailed for a preteen girl to just make up. I barely slept that night, jumping at every creak in Lila's house, imagining someone was lurking outside. 7 years later, in 2006, I was a college freshman back home for Thanksgiving. Lila and I hadn't seen each other since we graduated high school, so I drove over to her house the day before Thanksgiving. After some small talk and catching up, she dropped a bomb on me. "Do you remember that really messed up story Emma told us during that sleepover?" Truth be told, I had been thinking about that story ever since I got back into town. "Yeah, why?" "You're not gonna believe this, but it wasn't a made-up story. It actually happened." "What?" "That story always bothered me because it seemed so real. I did some research in my spare time at my school's library. In 1977, 3 Girl Scouts were found dead in their sleeping bags at Camp Scott. Their names were Lori Farmer, Michelle Guzet, and Denise Milner. The counselor who discovered them was Carla Wilhite, Emma's aunt." My stomach dropped. For years, we thought Emma was just a good storyteller trying to impress us that night, but she had been telling the truth. Her aunt was the one who discovered the bodies of those 3 girls in 1977. At the time, there was an escaped convict named Jean Leroy Hart who was suspected to be the one who committed the murders. He was arrested and faced a criminal trial back in the 70s, but was acquitted by a jury due to lack of evidence. It wouldn't be until 2022 that DNA testing revealed that he was likely the perpetrator, but by then, he had been dead for over 40 years. I was thinking of a good way to end this story, and considering that even the DNA testing was never able to definitively prove that Hart was the monster in the woods that night, and the very real possibility that someone else may have been involved, I can think of no better way to end things than by quoting Emma's own words.
They never caught the guy. Some say he's still out there, lurking somewhere in those woods.
There's always a reason to be
afraid.